Picture this. You are sitting in like a seemingly endless afternoon meeting, staring blankly at a whiteboard covered in dry erase markers.
Oh, yeah, we have all been there.
Right. The air is stale, the coffee is cold, and you really can't help but wonder, why is it so incredibly hard to just make a good decision at work?
It really is the ultimate workplace mystery. I mean, organizations gather these highly educated, capable people, put them in a room with a clear objective, and somehow the output is either complete chaos or a policy that makes absolutely zero operational sense.
Yes, 0 cents. And today, we're going to figure out exactly why that happens. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're exploring the hidden mechanics of organizational decision-making.
And we are drawing heavily from Catherine Miller's comprehensive research on organizational communication for this one.
Exactly. Our mission today is to completely deconstruct how choices are made. We're going to start by shattering the myth of the perfectly logical individual, then dive into the very messy reality of group collaboration.
Which is always fun.
Oh, totally. And finally, we'll look at how the digital age is basically rewriting the rules of the entire game.
And I think it's a necessary journey, really, because so much of modern corporate structure is built on these foundational assumptions about human logic that, frankly, they just fall apart the moment you apply them to real people.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the baseline. There's this traditional, almost romanticized expectation in business that decisions should be and can be made with perfect, unassailable logic.
Right. The literature usually calls this the normative model.
The normative model.
Yeah, or sometimes the prescriptive or optimizing approach. This is your classical, step-by-step, rational process, like the kind you might find in an intro to management textbook.
Right, the ideal scenario.
Exactly. It operates on a completely linear track. First, you define the problem. Second, you search the universe for literally all possible information. Third, you develop a comprehensive set of alternative options.
Sounds exhausting already.
Oh, it gets worse. Fourth, you evaluate every single option against strict criteria. And finally, you implement the absolute optimal solution.
I mean, to me, that sounds like using a mapping app that calculates literally every possible route on Earth.
Yes.
Like, it analyzes 10 years of historical traffic data and maps every pothole before it even lets you pull out of your driveway to get groceries. It just sounds paralyzing.
It is paralyzing.
I'd argue no human being actually has the time, the computing power, or just the sheer willpower to do that in the real world, right?
You're hitting on the exact limitation that organizational scholars identified decades ago. What's fascinating here is that researchers like March and Simon pioneered what's known as the descriptive approach.
Okay, so descriptive meaning how we actually do things.
Right. It looks at how we actually behave rather than how we theoretically should behave. And they introduced this brilliant concept called bounded rationality.
Bounded rationality.
Yeah. The idea is that humans inherently want to be logical. We try our best to be rational actors, but we're strictly bounded or fenced in, essentially by finite time, limited organizational resources, and honestly, the neurological limits of our own cognitive capacity.
We just can't process infinite variables.
We can't.
So if we lack the cognitive RAM to optimize every choice, we have to be using some kind of alternative mechanism to get through the day, right?
We do. We use a mechanism called satisficing.
Satisficing.
Yeah, it's a linguistic blend of satisfying and sufficing. If optimizing is searching through a massive haystack to find the single sharpest needle in existence.
Which takes forever.
Exactly. Satisficing is searching the haystack just until you find a needle that is sharp enough to sew a button on.
Oh, I love that. The moment you find a workable solution, you stop searching. You find a needle that works, and you get to sewing.
Right, you just get to work.
I love the practicality of that. But it makes me wonder about the selection process itself. Because we aren't just, algorithms blindly pulling the first needle we touch. There's a deeply human psychological filter determining what we consider sharp enough.
Absolutely. And that filter is mostly built on experience. Research by Simon and Barnard explored this through the lens of intuitive or analogical decision-making.
Analogical, like making analogies.
Exactly. They observed that veteran managers rarely rely on pure deductive logic. Instead, they rely on mental chunks of past experience.
So they see a pattern.
Right. A manager encounters a crisis and intuitively thinks, well, this feels analogous to a supply chain issue I handled 3 years ago. And they just apply a modified version of that past solution.
That makes so much sense.
And we see this limitation of pure rationality everywhere, even when the stakes are entirely personal. Like, look at behavioral finance.
Oh, people are terrible with money.
Yeah. When it comes to investing their own life savings, Individuals consistently rely on mental shortcuts heuristics rather than calculating rational probability. People follow herd movements, or they anchor onto a specific past stock price instead of acting like purely logical economic machines.
So our brains take shortcuts because we are cognitively bounded, relying on past chunks of experience just to survive the sheer volume of choices.
Exactly.
Now, if individual RAM is that limited, the natural organizational reflex is to network the computers, right? You put 10 bounded brains in a conference room hoping to synthesize one fully rational superbrain.
That is the hope, yes.
But think about the old saying, a camel is a horse designed by committee. If pooling intellectual resources is the answer, why do groups so frequently produce worse outcomes than individuals?
Because grouping people together introduces a whole new layer of social complexity that, frankly, often derails logic. There's this assumption that groups will naturally follow a rational phase model, like they will orient to the problem, debate the conflict, emerge with a solution, and reinforce it.
Right, the ideal normative model again.
Yeah, but observational research completely dismantles that myth. A scholar named Poole developed a multiple sequence model by studying how actual teams operate, and he found that a mere 23% of groups follow a logical, rational path.
Wait, really? Only 23%?
Just 23%.
That implies over 3/4 of all business meetings are just structurally derailed?
Yeah.
What are they actually doing in there?
Well, the vast majority fall into complex, cyclic paths. They get bogged down, going back and forth, arguing over minor subproblems while totally ignoring the big picture.
Oh, I've been in those meetings.
Or worse, they use a solution-oriented path, meaning they jump straight to pitching solutions without ever taking the time to define what the actual problem is.
They're just throwing answers at a wall and seeing what sticks.
Exactly.
But beyond just being inefficient, there's a much darker psychological mechanism at play when we put people in groups. The inherent human desire to belong can actually become dangerous.
Right. Yes, you're referring to groupthink, which is a highly documented phenomenon detailed by Janice. Groupthink occurs when individuals are so deeply entrenched in a cohesive in-group that their desire for unanimity and social harmony completely overrides their motivation to realistically appraise alternative courses of action.
It creates this deeply dangerous illusion of agreement.
It does. People self-censor their doubts because they fear ostracization. They put immense social pressure on anyone who dissents, and they actively shield the leader from contrary information just to maintain the group's positive self-image.
And the historical consequences of this are staggering. Like the structural pressure to launch the Space Shuttle Challenger despite clear engineering data about O-ring failures in cold weather. That is a classic example of group consensus silencing critical dissent.
It is. The financial collapse of Swissair is another one. And looking objectively through the lens of organizational theory, as the original researchers analyzed it, the 2003 U.S. intelligence failures regarding the Iraq invasion serve as another classic example of this.
Right. And just a quick note for you listening, we really need to emphasize that we're impartially reporting the textbook's analysis of this event right now. We aren't taking any political sides here or endorsing a specific viewpoint.
Absolutely. We're strictly discussing the organizational communication theory outlined in the source material. And that analysis suggests intelligence was embellished to fit a preferred, pre-existing policy solution rather than rationally evaluating the contradictory data.
Right. The drive for a preferred outcome completely short-circuits the brain's ability to evaluate risk.
Exactly.
So if individuals are inherently limited by bounded rationality and groups are essentially wired to prioritize harmony over critical thinking, how do we actually engineer a good decision?
That is the million-dollar question.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You can't just lock people in a room and hope for the best. To me, fixing a broken group process feels a bit like a doctor diagnosing a patient, or maybe building a suspension bridge.
Oh, I like the bridge analogy.
Right. You wouldn't just throw raw steel and concrete at a river and hope it holds. You have to follow a strict engineering process and actively stress test the materials before you put weight on them.
That's a highly accurate way to frame it, and it aligns perfectly with Hirakawa and Goran's functional theory of group decision-making. They argue that a group's success relies entirely on fulfilling specific communicative functions. It serves as an engineering checklist for the group's mental health.
Okay, what's the checklist?
First, the group must build a correct understanding of the issue at hand. Second, they have to explicitly determine the minimal characteristics required of any acceptable solution.
Setting the baseline criteria.
Right. Third, they identify a range of realistic alternatives. And fourth, they must rigorously examine those alternatives against the criteria they established in step 2.
Okay, but on the surface, that sounds remarkably similar to the normative rational model we dismissed earlier as impossible.
I know, it does share DNA with the rational model, but the mechanism is different. Functional theory uses communication as the structural guardrail to force a bounded groove to stay on track. And the research backing this theory uncovered something that completely defies conventional corporate wisdom.
Ooh, what's that?
Statistically, simply generating a massive volume of solutions, what we all call brainstorming, has almost no strong correlation to high-quality decisions.
Wait, brainstorming doesn't work.
Yep.
That essentially invalidates every corporate offsite and startup retreat I have ever heard of. What is the mechanism making brainstorming fail?
Well, brainstorming fails when it exists in a vacuum. The research shows that the true secret to a successful decision lies in the final step of the functional checklist, the negative evaluation of alternatives.
Negative evaluation.
Yeah. Groups succeed when they are willing to critically, aggressively stress test the ideas on the table. Brainstorming without rigorous critique is just compiling a list of untested fantasies. Ideas require friction to prove their structural integrity.
Wow, so negative feedback is actually the central feature of a healthy group, not a bug to be smoothed over. That flips the traditional no bad ideas mantra completely upside down.
It really does.
But if we know the functional process a group needs to follow, we also have to look at the composition of the group itself, like who actually gets a seat at the table.
Yeah, this is the domain of participation in decision-making, or PDM. Organizational communication highlights two distinct models explaining why involving employees actually works.
Okay.
The first is the effective model, which is rooted in the human relations approach. This model suggests that participation works because it satisfies a worker's higher-order ego needs. Being asked for input makes an employee feel valued.
And when they feel valued, their job satisfaction rises.
Exactly, and a satisfied worker is a productive worker.
But, I mean, the danger there seems to be participation purely as theater. Like, a manager might hold a town hall meeting, ask for everyone's input on a new software rollout, nod thoughtfully, and then just implement the software they already bought 3 weeks ago.
Well, that happens all the time.
You're using the effective model just to make people feel involved without any intention of using their ideas.
Which often backfires and creates deep cynicism. But contrast that with the cognitive model, which stems from the human resources approach. The cognitive model argues that participation works not because it boosts egos, but because the people closest to the actual physical work possess knowledge that upper management simply does not have.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, if the factory floor machinery keeps jamming, bringing the machine operators to the table improves the upward flow of vital information. It objectively improves the decision because you are utilizing frontline expertise.
So for you listening to this, think about the dynamics in your own workplace. When leadership asks for your opinion, are they operating on the effective model just trying to boost morale, or the cognitive model, where they genuinely need your expertise to solve the puzzle? Because identifying that fundamentally changes how you engage in a meeting.
It really does. And we also have to expand our definition of where these interactions even take place. The literature introduces the bona fide group's perspective, which emphasizes that context is everything. Decision-making is rarely confined to a scheduled hour in a formal conference room with an agenda.
Oh, it's the classic meeting after the meeting phenomenon. The official meeting ends, and then 3 people walk to the parking lot and actually decide what is going to happen.
Exactly that. It's the backstage communication. A fascinating study of a geriatric healthcare team demonstrated this perfectly. The researchers found that shifting team memberships, quick 5-minute hallway conversations, and informal chats at the nurse's station were just as crucial to finalizing patient care strategies as the formal, scheduled team sit-downs.
So if you only analyze the official meeting minutes, you are entirely blind to how the decision was truly forged in the hallways.
Totally blind.
Now, all of these theories, whether it's bounded rationality, groupthink, or hallway chats, they rely on humans talking to humans. But what happens when organizations try to bypass these messy human biases entirely? Like, how is the influx of technology fundamentally altering this landscape?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are witnessing a massive structural shift toward big data and algorithmic processing, what some theorists call supercrunchers.
Supercrunchers.
Yeah. Because human rationality is heavily bounded and groups are highly susceptible to social pressure, organizations are offloading the decision-making process to vast electronic databases. An algorithm does not get tired, it does not fear disagreeing with the CEO, and it can process a million variables in a second.
It's an attempt to replace flawed human intuition with objective mathematical certainty.
Precisely.
But there is a hidden cost to that objectivity,
Right.
right? If an algorithm is making the final call, the human roles around that decision are essentially routinized. Like, think about the banking industry. Historically, getting a small business loan involves sitting across a desk from a loan officer.
Right, you had a conversation.
Yeah, you could explain the context of your situation, and they could use their analogical intuition to make a judgment call on your character. Today, an algorithm scans your credit history and spits out a binary yes or no. The human context is completely stripped away to achieve that mathematical efficiency. Is the era of charming the loan officer just over?
It might be. It is the ultimate double-edged sword. Technology eliminates human bias, but it simultaneously eradicates human nuance. However, technology isn't just making decisions for us, it is also the medium we use to make decisions with each other.
True.
Like, how do we choose whether to resolve a conflict over a video call, an instant message, or a formal email?
Ah, the daily modern struggle. I feel like we constantly misjudge which tool to use.
Well, the traditional framework for this is the media richness model. It posits that humans make highly logical choices based on the ambiguity of the task. If a task is highly ambiguous, like navigating a sensitive interpersonal conflict, we naturally select a rich medium, like a face-to-face meeting, where we can interpret vocal tone and body language.
Makes sense.
But if the task is entirely unambiguous, like sending a numerical weekly report, we choose a lean medium, like a spreadsheet attachment in an email.
Okay, but based on everything we've discussed today, that sounds suspiciously like the perfectly rational normative model. It sounds like how humans should act, not how they actually do act.
You are connecting the dots perfectly. The media richness model assumes perfect rationality. To explain reality, theorists developed the social information processing model.
Social information processing.
Yeah. This model proves that your choice of technology is heavily dictated by your social environment and the office grapevine, not just objective logic.
Give me an example of that.
Let's say your university mandates a highly efficient, objectively superior new online teaching platform. According to the rational model, everyone should adopt it. But if you hear from 3 respected colleagues in the break room that the interface is frustrating, you will likely avoid using it. Social information and peer influence completely override the objective technical specifications.
Because we are social creatures long before we are logical creatures, our peers' opinions form a heuristic shortcut.
Exactly.
So taking a step back, how on earth does an organization successfully manage this chaotic web? You've got the algorithms, the hallway gossip, the bounded brains, and the group dynamics.
Organizations attempt to wrangle this through knowledge management. It's the structured process of identifying and harnessing intellectual assets. Nonaka and Takeuchi explain that a truly successful system has to manage 2 distinct types of knowledge.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is tacit knowledge. This is the deeply ingrained cultural, in-your-head expertise. It's the seasoned restaurant manager who just intuitively knows how to reassign tables to survive an unexpected Sunday rush.
And the organizational goal is to extract that intuition so it isn't lost if that manager quits.
Precisely. They try to convert that tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is synoptic, it's codified, written down in a training manual, and stored in a database so anyone can access it. But importantly, scholars like Sukas argue that an organization cannot survive on explicit knowledge alone. A rigid system must leave room for improvisational knowledge. Because the real world is incredibly messy, there will always be unprecedented situations where the explicit rules fail, the algorithm errors out, and humans just have to improvise on the fly to bridge the gap.
That human ability to adapt is the ultimate safety net. Man, what an incredible journey through the mechanics of our work lives. We started by completely shattering the illusion that humans are perfectly rational decision makers. We're bounded, relying on mental shortcuts and satisficing just to function.
Very true.
We explored how throwing individuals into a group doesn't magically create logic. And without rigorous negative evaluation, teams easily collapse into dangerous groupthink. We saw that the real decisions often bypass the boardroom entirely for the hallway, and that big data is fundamentally trying to rewrite the rules of who or what makes the call.
It really forces us to look at the entire corporate structure differently, and I think it leaves us with a fascinating paradox to consider for the future. We spend all this time trying to build artificial intelligence that can perfectly optimize decisions, essentially trying to create the flawless normative model in digital form. But as AI becomes increasingly integrated into the chaotic, unpredictable real world, it might find that perfect optimization is mathematically impossible. The next great leap in technology might not be an AI that perfectly optimizes, but an AI that finally learns how to satisfy us, just like a human.
An algorithm that knows how to settle for the needle that is just sharp enough. That is a wild concept to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Tomorrow, when you are sitting in that inevitable meeting, take a look around the room. Notice the social currents. See who is truly evaluating the ideas, and ask yourself if the group is searching for the perfect solution or just improvising their way to one that works. Catch you next time.